If I was starting CrossFit in 2025, this is exactly how I would do it. And trust me, this is probably not what you've been told before. Hey, I'm Briscoe, and I've been coaching athletes from complete beginners to competitive RX athletes for over 5 years now. And in this video, I'm going to break down the pillars that I use and I would be focusing on if I was starting from scratch today. So whether you are brand new or you're at the intermediate level and feeling stuck, this video is going to give you a clear roadmap on how to hit better skills, lift heavier, move better, and be more confident within the sport without burning out or feeling stuck. So let's dive in. How I'd start CrossFit in 2025 for the newbie, scaled, or intermediate level athlete. All right, this is how I started my CrossFit journey in 2020. English lockdown was awful. Anyone who knows there were no gyms open, definitely no coaches available. And I was like, you know what? This is the time we're going to start CrossFit. Bought this crappy little pull-up bar from Amazon and actually did my first CrossFit Open on it, doing strict chest to bars and strict toes to bars. So obviously we couldn't kip. But because of all of these reasons and the fact that I just didn't invest in coaching at this point, although I did end up eventually at quite a good level, I did literally every possible thing wrong that I could have along the way. But in doing so, it actually made it very easy for me when I did start coaching CrossFit properly to identify faults and mistakes in other athletes, and pretty well, because I could relate to all of them because I'd literally done everything wrong myself. And in doing this, I was really good at identifying problems, fixing them, and then working with athletes to overcome issues they were facing. And also with my background as well, I have a very strong academic background in strength and conditioning. So I understood the principles around training. And then when I understood the sport a lot better, this is what's led me to filming this presentation now and doing all the coaching that I have done, because I feel like I really do understand what athletes need. And therefore, I'm going to explain to you exactly what I would be doing if I was starting from scratch now with all the new knowledge that I have. Now, this whole presentation is going to come back to you need to have a proper plan in place of what you're trying to do, where you're trying to get to, what your goals are, and so on and so forth. Because after this slide, everything I'm going to go on to say requires you to have knowledge from your training audit. So if you haven't already done this, I would pause this video as I'm going now and make notes and figure out exactly what relates to you with each of these points, because that is what will drive the rest of the presentation for you. I do this audit with my athletes when they first start with me, so when they're brand new, and then we repeat it every 6 weeks. So this is something that I think you should be doing regularly to make sure the training you're doing is always directed to what you need. So whether you're brand new right now or whether you're already been training for a few years and you just need to sharpen up, I would be doing this right now. Initially, we want to outline your current strengths and current weaknesses. And sometimes athletes are like, I don't have any strengths, but you definitely do. What are your better things and what are your worst things? And try and list 2 to 5, maybe more for each of those, and have a look at them. You'll probably notice that they're categorized into similar items. So most athletes I coach at the minute, strengths are like, I'm good at squats, good at cleans, good at ergs, for example. Weaknesses, I can't do any gymnastics, or I'm good at deadlifts and bench press and squats, my classic movements, but I can't do a snatch or move anything overhead. So have a look at what you're good at, what you hate. Next, identify what your number one training priority is for the next 3 months. I always want you to think about your training in 3 months blocks, because in my opinion, that is the time frame that you need to make real progress. So what's the number one thing that you want to achieve? Maybe that is hitting your first toast bar. And then you will think about, in a couple of points' time, how much time do I need each week to achieve that goal? Then we're looking at middle priority goals. So these are things that are still very important to you, but they fall just behind that number one training priority. And then we're looking at lesser goals, the things that you still want to actively work on should the time permit within your training week. Now, when we look at the training time, now tell me, how many sessions is realistic for you to train in total, and how long do you want those sessions to last for? And this will determine how many of those goals we meet. So let's return to what I just said. Your number one training goal at the minute is a toaster bar. Say a toaster bar needs between 60 and 90 minutes of quality training each week to do all of the pre-work, the core work, the strength, the skills, and so on. And I have a whole video just on toaster bar if you would like to see it. But say your overall training time in the week was 2 hours. That's how much you've got time to train. Most of that training time is going to be addressing your number one goal. Say it's a toaster bar, so you've got a short amount of time to do one of your middle priority goals. Say your overall training time each week is 6 hours. You can do 6 1-hour sessions during the week or whatever. then you'll probably be able to do your number one goal, most of your middle priority goals, and some of your lesser goals as well. So there's no right or wrong with how much time you have to train. You just have to be realistic with the overall time needs to match how many things you're working on. It's much better to do fewer goals done very well than try and work on lots of things and don't tick any of them off. Next, to figure out exactly where you're going to go in at each skill, we need to find out exactly what your current ability level is. Say your number one goal at the minute is to hit a bar muscle up, but currently you haven't done any work for it, you haven't started any drills, you haven't got your toes to bar, you haven't got your chest to bar. That's going to be a problem. So making sure that your current ability level is appropriate for the goals that you're wanting to work on. Similarly, we want to work out where you currently are with your lifts. So what I just said was more appropriate to gymnastics progressions. Current lifting PBs are more appropriate to strength and Ollie progressions. And then just, do you have any limitations? If you are recovering at the minute from bursitis in your shoulder or an ACL reconstruction, and you have goals that are going to heavily use that joint, then we need to think a little bit cleverly about how you're going to get there with the limitations you have. So go through now, identify all of this, and it's going to give you a very clear understanding as to the rest of this presentation and how it will make sense to you. In my opinion, every newbie, scaled, or intermediate level athlete should have their training week composed of some combination of these 5 pillars. Now, you might not use all 5. Your training week might consist of 2 or 3, but there probably wouldn't be anything additional to this that you need to take focus. And I'm going to run you through in this presentation now what each of these means, because if I was starting from scratch right now, I would be focusing on these 5 pillars and making my training fit into these. So number 1 is going to be our strength foundation. There are very, 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 very few times, like maybe 1 in the last 600 athletes I've coached, where strength is not the number 1 priority for that athlete. Now, you might be thinking, oh, but my strength's quite good. I feel like I can squat, I can bench, I can deadlift, but I just can't do the gymnastics. So what I need to be focusing on is those drills. Wrong. When you focus on strength and have that as the pivotal part of your training week, you get better gymnastics. You get better bar cycling, you hit heavier lifts, you get better erg development, you get better capacity within your workouts, and you get better running economy. So by focusing on strength and always having it as the center of your week, everything within CrossFit gets better. And conversely, when you don't prioritize strength and you focus too much on the other elements and not enough on your foundation, all of these sections get worse. Because what happens a lot of the time, especially with something like gymnastics, is athletes work to getting their first rep of a kipping pull-up or a toaster bar or a handstand push-up, and they're like, perfect, I've worked really, really hard on my technique and I've got rep 1. But if they don't have the active strength component to back it, they can't get past rep 1, or maybe they can get a couple of reps, but they definitely can't link 20, which is what we're ultimately aiming for. So having strength always as the foundation is something that athletes always miss, because they start CrossFit and they're like, oh, WODs, oh, cleans, oh, gymnastics. And the baseline falls, and over the next couple of years, everything doesn't really get any better. Okie dokie. If you're thinking, nah, I'm really strong. Are you this strong? Because these are the ultimate pinpoints that you want to be aiming for. So strict pull-ups being 10 or more, strict dips being 10 or more, strict handstand push-ups being 10 or more, snatches, ladies at 70, guys at 100, cleans at 90 and 140, and squats at 120 and 180. So if you can hit all of these, then fair play, good job. You probably do not need strength to be at the forefront of your training. But if you're a long way off these goals, which most people who are watching this presentation will be, this is what we are aiming for. So what type of strength do I need? I've been saying you need strength, you need strength, you need strength. The foundation of your week should be it, but what does that actually mean? With your gymnastics, we want to be doing maximal base pushing strength and maximal base pulling strength. And then we also want to layer further push and pull based strength, plus accessories which are going to support things like your shoulders, and then a whole heap of core training. For your Olympic lifting, we want to have compound lifts, so that's your squat, your bench, your deadlift. We want lots of single limb work, things like lunges and Bulgarians. We want overhead strength and stability, and then lots of odd object training, which is going to massively help your whole body strength. So if your goals span both of these elements, which many of you will, then all of these things should be in your training week. And because there is such a big list of things that you should be working on, this is why this takes the biggest component of time. Okay, number 2 is lifting technique. It is very common for athletes to be coached by me and within the first 2 or 3 weeks to hit PBs. And the reason is not because they've got stronger. Even with the best program in the world, that's a pretty big ask to do. But what we can do immediately within one session is fix something in someone's technique. And as soon as your technique becomes more optimized, then your capacity to lift more vastly increases, even if you don't get any stronger. So having great technique from the get-go is paramount. So if I was starting again, I would 100% be spending more time on my technique. And if I was starting over, I'd be going back to the basics and all my skills and making sure that I was moving perfectly, which in most cases I see is not the case. Now, like I just said, I actually find that if I'm coaching an athlete who's been in CrossFit for a few months only, I can get them to progress far quicker and further than an athlete who's been in the sport for 5 years already but has bad habits, because trying to undo things that have been taught poorly the first time or not taught properly at all is so much more time consuming, more difficult and more frustrating for an athlete than teaching them correctly the first time. So going back to the basics and refining your movement technique will often mean that you can open up heavier lifts within 1 or 2 weeks compared to months and months of strength training. Most common problems that I see, early arm pulls. This is the biggest one. That's actually what Nolan was just working on there. Now, an early arm pull can be a bent arm pull where you row the bar, or it can be a straight arm pull where you slide the bar up your thighs. Either way, we don't want it. This often combines and leaps to a loopy bar path. Ria here is working on that. Clunky extensions where the bar doesn't meet properly at the upper thigh or hips. Athletes who catch a movement high in their snatch and they don't get straight underneath the bar, or athletes who jump forwards or backwards. These are the most common problems and faults that I see and work on, and I'm pretty sure that if you're watching this, at least one of those is going to apply to you. Next up, we're going to work on isolated gymnastics, and that means perfecting a skill before you try and put it in a workout. And by perfecting the skill, you're going to go through this sequential pattern that I'm about to run you through now. This is the reason, and this quote really resonated with me when a coach explained it to me. Say you've been training in running and you've worked your way up to hitting your first 5K, and 5K is the first you've ever run, and you've been training for 6 weeks and you've hit your first 5K. Next week, would you then enter 5 lots of 5-kilometer races in a row and expect to perform well in them? Obviously not. That is absolutely ridiculous. Yet, when someone's been training for a long period of time and they've built 3 toes to bar, for some reason in workouts, that athlete will often hop up onto the bar and try and do 3 toes to bar every time under fatigue, and then wonder why sometimes they can't do any. And they get beat up by themselves, like, I must be going backwards, I'm really rubbish. And it's not the case at all. You just haven't followed correct progressions or been smart with what you're trying to do. This is what I would be focusing on. Number 1 is doing progressive and smart drills to learn the skill in the first place. So if you're trying to learn a movement for the first time, the majority of your training time at the minute is going to be spent doing the strength for the skill and doing progressive drills for the skill. Now, for athletes who are learning a skill like a toaster bar or a kipping pull-up, the time spent in progressive drills is normally a lot less than someone who's trying to learn a bar muscle up or a ring muscle up. So the amount of weeks or months you spend doing drills is going to relate in part to the difficulty of the movement you're trying to get, and also how much of a base you've had for it. I've had athletes who have learned a bar muscle up in 3 weeks because they came in at a really good base and could tick off all the prerequisites really well. I've had some athletes that have taken 8-9 months to learn a bar muscle up. Once you've got your first unassisted rep, awesome, well done. You are only at step 2 of my guidelines. So absolutely right to celebrate, but there is still so much work to do with this movement. The next thing we want to be doing is small sets of EMOMs, or sometimes I get my athletes to do 2 reps every 30 seconds for 8 sets, something like that, where we're working on small like doubles or triples and trying to do them repetitively over a series of sets. In combination with doing this, the way that we push an athlete from having a very small set number to a slightly bigger set number is we also want to combine it with higher volume sets of an assisted rep. So for example, with a pull-up, maybe the athlete can do sets of double kipping pull-ups on their own, and we do that in a 10-minute EMOM. But then we also follow it up with a banded pull-up where they can do 5 to 7 reps, and we do that movement as well. So it's having different variations of the movement working together to help push your volume up. Now let's assume that we've got to a point where we can do 10 sets of 3 of your movement. Now we want to start working higher volume sets. So how do we get that 3 reps to 6 reps to 15 reps? Now the thing that we start to combine here is harder variants of the movement. So let's take a handstand push-up. Say we've got to a point now where we can do kipping handstand push-ups and we're doing 5 sets of 5. So we're ticking into that higher volume work, but we want to get that to 5 sets of 10. What we start to do now is a harder variant of the movement. So we're going to do a strict handstand push-up, but maybe this athlete can't do one on their own. So we do a banded strict handstand push-up. It's still a harder variant of the movement. We're adding the band to make it possible, and we're doing sets there as well. Now this athlete within a couple of weeks, instead of being able to do 5 kipping handstand push-ups, can now do 15 kipping handstand push-ups, which sounds like a huge and unrealistic progression, but it's very possible, and it's what I do with my athletes regularly. Once you can get to a point now where we're in double figures for your skills, we're ready to put it into workouts and test it under different circumstances. So that is my progressive isolated drill sequence from learning the movement, getting your first rep, building small volume, building large volume, and then putting it into workouts. Next up, body mechanics. This could be very appropriate for you, or it could be not appropriate at all. But just to highlight how important your body mechanics are, if you cannot hit a full depth overhead squat, which I could not do without falling over when I first started, you cannot snatch. And if you cannot hit a full depth front squat, which I also could not do when I started, you cannot clean. And if you can't put your arms over your head and squeeze them up by your ears, you can't do a proper jerk or a handstand walk. If you're not able to arch properly in your thoracic over a med ball, open up your shoulders, you're not going to have a very good kick within your gymnastics. So if you don't work on these things, you can't do the movement. And there are so many instances where I work with an athlete where they're strong, they're fit, they understand what they're meant to be doing, but their body is that bloody stiff that they physically cannot get into any of the positions I need them to. And if they did, they'd probably break themselves. So in those situations, if you don't focus on your underlying mobility and body's mechanics and capacity to move, you can't progress in the sport. So it is so important for certain athletes that they focus on this. The main things that I would be working on are my ankles. It was actually for me the ankles that I needed to fix for me to be able to Olympic lift, your thoracic, which is the top portion of your spine, your hips and your shoulders. Now, if you are a really hypermobile athlete, you're maybe got a dancer background or a gymnastic background, I would say do not spend any time on your mobility. In your situation, put the time into your strength. If you're a normal athlete, so you move fairly well, but there are some restrictions, I'd be doing 10 minutes per day. And if you are tight as a plank of wood like Danny was, then you need to be doing this for 20 minutes each day and focusing on the areas where are tight for you. Most athletes, it's their ankles that are the problem, and that should be their pinpoint focal. Moving on, intensity-based fitness. This is our next piece of the puzzle. And at uni, we actually spent an entire term identifying the most effective and the quickest way to build aerobic fitness. And honestly, I was mortified by the results for it. This is what we need to do. And it is the combination, and that word is very important, the combination of having some of your week in top end intensity based work and some of your week building an aerobic base. And it is the two of these combined working together in separate sessions that builds the fastest and the best fitness. So your aerobic engine, what does that look like? This is long duration exercise, so 40 minutes plus ideally, and it's of a very low effort, zone 2 effort, which is having a conversation, your heart rate should be fairly low, and you should be able to go for a long period of time. So many times athletes are like, I went for a 5K run, it was a zone 2. I'm like, what was your heart rate? 160? Well, it's not zone 2. The combination here is top end intensity. So this is very short duration, very high intensity, red line, maximal effort work. This is not doing a 15-minute EMOM and at the end being lying on your back, panting and puffing because it was really hard. This is max effort sprints on the Echo bike repeated, or 2 or 3 minute, very, very hard intervals where you do max calories on a machine, for example. What happens most of the time, and this is why I was so mortified when I studied it so heavily, is that the general population, anyone who doesn't understand this properly, will spend the majority of their fitness time in the grey zone, where the intensity isn't hard enough or short enough for it to truly be maximal. And equally, it's too hard and too short for it to be aerobic. So if you actually come away from what you are doing at the minute and spend a bit more time doing top end intensity, which is gross, just to pre-warn you, and a bit more time doing the slower aerobic work, you will end up getting far, far further and quicker than if you spend your time in this grey middle zone. So it's running for longer, but running slower, and then doing intensity and interval-based work that is shorter, but harder. And it wasn't until I personally experienced this firsthand that I truly accepted that the research I'd been doing at uni was actually true, and that I noticed the biggest input within my own fitness. It's at this point that when I started coaching athletes, in our aerobic-based days, we have a long, slow component on one day, and we have a power output intensity-based interval on the other day. And it's those athletes who follow this properly that only need to do a few weeks of this training to be at peak fitness going into their competitions. Normally, if I have an athlete that's got a competition in 12 weeks' time, we don't touch any of this until their second cycle with 6 weeks to go. And that's all the time that we need, doing 2 sessions a week to get them to peak fitness for that comp, which means we have so much other time within our training week to continue working on their strength and their skills, which are far more important usually, and they take a lot longer to build. But what about all of the ones in CrossFit that don't match either of these descriptors? So pretty much everything. Now, I'm not saying you don't need to touch point on them, and I'm not saying that they aren't important to do every now and then, but what I am saying is you don't get better at workouts by doing workouts. You get better at workouts by increasing your fitness, which is doing aerobic work and top end capacity, by getting stronger and by getting more skilled. So if your focal points within your training are those things that I've just said, your workout capacity will get far improved. On the flip side, if all you do is practice workouts, then you'll get a little bit better, but nowhere near what you could do if you focused on the other things. And again, I discovered this for myself in practice, and that's when I really started implementing it with my athletes. In the 2023 Open, that's when I was training the most. I was doing the most workout practice. I was in the gym for the most amount of hours, and this was my entire world and life. In the 2024 Open, unfortunately, a few months prior, I'd been in a really bad car accident and wasn't able to train for a period of time. And when I actually got to the Open, I'd only been training for maybe 3 or 4 weeks. But during that time, I've been focusing on my intensity-based work and my aerobic work. And I went into that Open crazily fit compared to the other ones, because the training time I'd been doing, whilst very small, had been very focused on those points that I've been telling you about. So intensity, aerobic, strength, skill. They're going to be your magic components. Which kind of leads me on to highlighting to you guys, your gym classes alone are not designed to take you on this journey. And hopefully, with all of the knowledge that you've got from this presentation, this makes perfect sense to you right now. So let's talk about the pillars of gym classes. They want to create a safe environment for all. They want people to leave having a good workout and having a good sweat and feeling like they've done something. They want to create a community within their gym and do things that bring people together. They want to have friendly competition between you and your peers. And they want to expose everybody to a broad range of domains, which is within CrossFit. And none of these things are bad at all. I think all of these are great, and I do really enjoy doing classes from time to time myself. However, those 5 pillars of gym classes are not the things that are going to take you from a scaled or newbie athlete to an RX one, because they are not going to address your personal areas of weakness that you have identified in this training audit. They're not going to be spending enough time doing the strength that relates to your goals. They're not going to be breaking down the drills in enough detail for the movements that you personally want to do. They're not going to be spending 20 minutes each session mobilizing your left shoulder. And they're not going to spend enough time in the split between top end intensity work and zone 2 training. And for all of those reasons, if you just focus on gym classes, you're not going to get where you want to be very quickly. So having either just programming work or a combination of programming and classes is going to be very important for you moving forwards. And the combination ratio that you decide will determine a lot based on how much time you have each week, how many goals you want to be working on, and how important they are for you to achieve. So if I was to start again this year, or if you were to start again this year, I would be changing my entire training week and structure to address those 5 pillars that I ran through in relation to your training audit, and working out which sections make the most for you to do, which ones are the priority, and therefore what does your overall training week look like. Right team, I hope you found this helpful, and I will look forward to seeing you in my next video.